Hi, I'm Kyle with Cots Brothers. I just wanted to touch base here and share my thoughts on the fur market a little bit going into this next fur harvester sale, which is coming up here in a couple days. Um, Last fall, I heard a lot of trappers talking about Russia and Russia getting back in the fur market. And now, of course, we have the whole Russia-Ukraine conflict and a lot of concern there. But I want to show, before we get into uh, looking at the offering of fur harvesters, it's my first time using StreamYard, so hopefully it works out. But I want to show this graph here, or this chart, of the Russian ruble. Currently, we're at 103 rubles to the dollar. But if we look back at this chart, um, back in 2012, 2013 is when the coon market was really strong, and we had a lot of Illinois trappers averaging close to $40 on their coon. It was a bit of a boom. But then you'll see here the ruble was trading about 30. We're at like 30, 31, $32 or 32 rubles to the dollar. And then in 2015, it jumps up to 70 or 69.08, 69 rubles to the dollar. So it more than devalues by double. And then as we go through here, these past from 2013 till now, we've not really had a huge great coon market. Here in 17, the ruble came back down to 50, it came back to about in the 50s. But then if we fast forward here and we get into 21, the ruble's trading, it's in the mid 70s, the exchange to the dollar. So then when the conflict happens, it jumps up as high as basically where we're at now, over 100 rubles to the dollar. So the idea that Russia was going to get back in the market is kind of deceiving, because if you look at the exchange rate, the Russian economy was not doing very well before the conflict. So now with the conflict and where the world is at, I don't see Russia being a huge participant at this next fur harvester sale. Um, if we look back to 2000, oh, wrong slide. If we go back to 1998, I remember very well, because I was trapping a lot of coon, and it was early on in my long lining days of trapping Iowa. In 98, the ruble fell from 3 rubles to the dollar to 27 rubles to the dollar, and the raccoon market fell exponentially. I remember the buyer I was working with told me he was going to probably be in the $20-$25 range for raccoons. And then after that collapse, he was talking like $3 to $5. Like the coon market just fell off. So when we see these big swings in the ruble, it does affect coon prices generally. There may not be as much of a correlation anymore as there once was, but there definitely it is an indication as to the Russian economy and the consumer in Russia being able to buy our raccoon garments. I've also another factor of Russia and the idea that Russia was getting back in the fur market is kind of deceiving, because over the course of time, a lot of Russian buyers never left the market, but they started doing their manufacturing in China. So even though the Russian buyer was not necessarily participating in an auction, does not mean they left the fur market. Sometimes auctions are not the end all be all of the fur market, and the fur market can exist outside of simply having an auction, because there's a lot of buyers that, especially Grunwalds, are putting fur right in China, basically for manufacturers to buy as they need when they have orders to fill. And naturally, if Russia is buying from a Chinese manufacturer who can buy fur basically right down the street in their own country, that whole system exists outside of the auction. So let's. I guess I want to touch on Russia before I get too far in depth. But let's look at the offering for this next sale. It's kind of interesting. A few things that stand out to me. If we look at this number right here, there's 30,000 raccoon on the sale, which 30,000 raccoon is very, very small quantity of raccoons. So what happens is when you have a very small quantity of an item like that, manufacturers, users of raccoon are probably not going to travel or spend much time looking at the at the at the auction for a small quantity. Which 30,000 sounds like a lot of raccoon, but when we're thinking there's probably close to 1 million raccoon in country buyers' hands, this figure here could represent only 3% of the available coon on the market. So it'll be interesting to see. To me, this is the one item I'm really watching to see what Fur Harvesters does. On the previous sale, they sold a lot of raccoons at like 50 cents, which, as a trapper, you get 50 cents and you get commissions taken out. You have to remember Fur Harvesters gets a buyer's shipping or handling and packing fee, which I believe is like $2.75 a raccoon. So if they sell a raccoon for 50 cents, the buyer's actually paying $3.25. Fur Harvesters gets the $2.75 out of that $3.25. So that's another factor that could affect the raccoon on this sale, because if the certain sections of raccoon may only be worth $1.50, but if a buyer has to pay $2.75 on top of that, now they're at $4.25 for a raccoon that they value at $1.50. So you have to keep that in mind, that could really have an effect on a depressed item like the raccoon. The top item here, 55,000 beaver. I would say that this is probably going to be one item that the trapper hopefully will be satisfied with. They should probably, I would think, move most of them. It seems like Fur Harvesters a lot of time does decent on beaver. As far as prognosticating what all these different items are going to do, that's kind of above my skill set, because I don't know. I do think some items, 45,000 coyotes, the heavier, better section Western coyotes, I suspect will move. A lot of the Midwestern, Eastern, Southern types, I don't see them catching a bid. I think it's going to be tough. So the same with like red fox, gray fox. All the fox are kind of going to be kind of tough, I think. When we look at the ranch for quantities, 3,000 ranch fox is a very limited number. It's basically it could be zero as far as attracting buyers to buy ranch fox. Most of the ranch fox that get sold at Fur Harvesters are generally sold for to North American buyers who tan them and are small manufacturers. I don't think these fox are actually going to China or being processed on a global scale, so to speak. They're mostly a domestic buyer. The ranch mink, I don't know what to think other than 100,000 is a very small quantity for ranch mink when Saga is offering millions. So and there's also sometimes people will say, oh, now that Fur Harvesters is offering ranch mink, that'll draw new buyers in. Well, not necessarily. Ranch mink buyers, manufacturers, they use ranch mink. They're not interested in all the other items generally. Sometimes when the ranch mink price gets very high, then they might come over here and look at muskrats a little bit as a substitute. But again, that's going to be only the real heavy muskrats. And it's with the ranch mink market the way it is, there's no need to look for a replacement because the ranch mink are plenty cheap. So I just click over here. Here's the order of the sale. Starts on the 24th with ranch mink, fox, chinchilla, and then coyote, muskrat, raccoon, and wild mink. I think this would be the day right here to see what the coyote, muskrat, raccoon do. That's going to be the three items I think that a lot of trappers have an interest in, and then of course beaver on the 27th. Sable is an item that, I hear people talk about, like, oh, the sable market. Well, sable or marten. The problem with that is it doesn't really have an effect overall on our industry, because it's marten only exists in a small area. So a lot of trappers are not interested in marten because they don't live in Ohio or Iowa, or I mean, there's places where they have marten, but you're only allowed to catch a handful. So it's not a real driving force from my standpoint when I look at the sale. The same with a lot of, on the 28th, a lot of these items: Timberwolf, Wolverine, black bear, grizzly bear, polar bear, squirrel, ermine, skunk, badger, possum, nutria, and dress fur. So skunks and possums, I mean, there's years that they do fairly well. I don't know this year. The skunk market seems to be something that is kind of a novelty. I could see them selling some of them, but otherwise, these animals, I normally refer to it as a zoo animal day, because it's just the kind of a hodgepodge of animals that are not really the backbone of the fur market. But sometimes some, and also for me, as being in the supply business, those animals don't drive trapping supply sales like beaver, coyote, muskrat, raccoon would. Um, so it'll be interesting to see what happens here, the next uh, the next few days at fur harvesters. So thanks for joining me. You can leave a comment or hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you in the next one.